This workshop's going to be a little bit different than some of the other sessions that's been done at CNU so far. So we're going to spend about the first 30, 45 minutes just kind of with some speakers, and then after that, we'll kind of break out into these small groups where you guys are sitting at these tables. We've got some specific questions to kind of ask everybody to kind of brainstorm on. So we've got tracing paper as well, so you guys can start sketching on different ideas. Me, Ryan, and Jamie and some of these other people up here will kind of be roaming around. So if you have any questions or need anything, just let us know. I'll go ahead and introduce myself really quickly. My name is Cody Brandt. I am with an organization called TYPROS, which is Tulsa Young Professionals. We have kind of started talking about some of these ideas and have been engaging with local representatives, several who are here today that are going to speak as well. Our organization is an arm of the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce, and our specific crew is called the Urbanist Crew, and we're all about urban design, good urban form, that type of development. Every year we kind of do big community projects as well that are community activation spaces, and one of the projects we're doing this year, which is for another gentleman that's over here, for a property that he owns that's actually adjacent to the highway that we're talking about today. So I'll go ahead and let Ryan introduce himself real quick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Cody. My name is Ryan Neal. I'm founder and CEO of Collective Forum. We've been working with Cody in the Transform Tulsa campaign since about November. We also work with other freeway fighting campaigns in Claiborne and elsewhere too. And yeah, just feel free to tap me on the shoulder and ask me any questions later. Thanks.
Yep. And Ben, obviously, pretty much everybody here probably knows him. I just want to say thank you, Ben, for allowing us to do this session, and also just thank you to CNU in general. It's nice to have such a large professional organization that supports things like highway removals, because there's a lot of other organizations that have similar goals and desires but are not necessarily as supportive of people like us. So some of the speakers today will be Katie with TSW right here, Franchelle with Be Good Development, Councilor McKee, and Representative Goodwin. So with that, I will kind of talk about some hot topics. 244 kind of became much more present in the mindset of the community recently. The race massacre in Tulsa, I'm sure most people are probably familiar with it given the national press. A lot of spotlight was put back on 244 and really the harm that it did to Greenwood and a lot of our other urban neighborhoods nearby. A lot of people may not really even know that Greenwood was rebuilt after the race massacre, and it was rebuilt back stronger and more financially viable even after the massacre. And it wasn't until they started building the freeways that they came back in and basically destroyed Greenwood for a second time. And I don't know if people in the national side that aren't as familiar with Tulsa even realize that. So pretty much between urban renewal programs, not just the highway building, but there's also a specific urban renewal campaign that acquired the majority of Greenwood and knocked down homes and everything. And so you guys, when we're done talking, we've got a bunch of the historical maps up over there. I think when you see some of the current pictures too here in a little bit, it's a pretty stark contrast of what used to be there and what's there now, and just really how impactful on a financial sense this was to our community. With that, I'll turn it over to Katie to kind of talk about the Kirkpatrick Heights and Greenwood Master Plan.
Thanks, Cody. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie O'Melia. I am a landscape architect and urban planner based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I work for the company TSW, and I'm the director of our Tulsa, Oklahoma office. So before I dive into the project that we're working on, I first want to just kind of talk about our actual team. TSW and myself are the local planners on the project. It's being led by WRT out of Philadelphia. We have a large team. We've got Puma out of Denver for our economic analysis portion of the project. And we have Studio Zudi out of New York, who is looking at the cultural interpretation piece of the master plan. And so our consulting team is working with the Tulsa Economic for Opportunity Group. It's TEO is the acronym. They're our actual clients, so basically it's sort of the city of Tulsa that actually put out the RFP for this project. In addition to the consulting team, we have an 11-person leadership committee that's comprised of prominent individuals within the Greenwood community, as well as business owners and neighbors, and they're really charged with working directly with our consultant team to guide that process. As Cody talked about, the creation of 244 and decades of disinvestment and policies has really seen the Greenwood and Kirkpatrick Heights area decline over the last decade. And the impetus for this master plan really began in 2018. So the TEO, the Tulsa Development Authority, regained control of a portion of the land that was set aside north of downtown called UCAT. So the idea was that Tulsa didn't have a major university located in our town, and so they thought, well, we'll get all 4 of the major ones in the state to come together and create this great mega campus. And really what happened was, what you figured would happen. Well, all of those universities compete with each other, right? And so locating on one campus never really came to fruition. So really we had OSU that actually built as part of their 20-year master plan, and then Langston has a small presence as well. But they were charged with building out that land, and over the course of 15 to 20 years, that never came to fruition. So in 2018, TEO actually was able to reclaim 3 portions of that project area, and that is really what the Kirkpatrick Heights and Greenwood Master Plan is focusing on. So the overall goal, which we've branded the project Our Legacy, Our Community, because it really is about building back community and wealth in the community. It's really it's to set a renewed vision for North Tulsa and to define what the community's vision is for Greenwood moving forward. And as part of that process, we're really committed to basically laying out an investment and mechanism structure for ownership within the community, so that any redevelopment that occurs on these 3 public sites will stay within the community, will incubate small businesses, and will be returned, the investment would be returned back into the community. Our project site, so I talked about 3 publicly owned sites. So the diagram to the left here shows those 3 publicly owned sites. The first one is the largest, being about 46 acres. Number 2 is about an 11-acre tract located just behind the historic Vernon AME Church. And then the third one is kind of an odd parcel, but it's basically backing up to B.S. Roberts Park. And so those are the 3 primary sites that this master plan is looking at in terms of the framework for redevelopment and what can happen there. But we're also looking at a larger, broader study area. So the dashed black line, it's the western boundary is the L.L. Tisdale Parkway. North is Pine Street. You have US Highway 75 on the east, and then the actual train tracks that kind of split downtown Tulsa is the southern end of our larger study area. And just within that study area are some of the most historical and loved places in Oklahoma. You obviously have the historic Greenwood. You're right on the edge of what we call Deep Greenwood, at the southern end of the site where it's labeled One Oak Field by the ball fields. You'll hear from Franchelle in a little bit, but the historic Evans Fintu site is also within the study area. In blue, kind of on the western edge of the study area, is the historic Heights neighborhood, which used to be called Brady Heights, which was renamed. Then the OSU Tulsa, you can see there in orange that I talked about, the UCAT land. And really, let me go to the next slide. So the project has several goals. One, obviously we need to create a community-driven process. As you would expect, there is a lot of distrust among residents and the city, just based on the historic nature of this area and the project. So building that trust with the community. It preserve and celebrate the legacy of the historic area and the history of Black Wall Street. And then again, determining ownership and economic benefit to the community as a guiding principle. And then increasing, sustainability, economic development, and improvements to the public realm, the street connections. So there's a lot of lofty goals in this master plan. We actually kicked the process off last year in June of 2021, and we are set in a couple weeks on April 5th to do our second round of charrettes with the community. So really, we haven't even delved into design at this point. All we've been doing is going out and meeting people face to face, one-on-one, and getting all that community input. What do they want to see? So that they're a part of the process and really guiding what comes out of this master planning process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Franchelle. She's going to talk to you a little bit about the historic Evans Fintu site and project and what's happening with that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. Well, as Katie said, my name is Franchelle Dalla. By day, I am the director of Rebuild, which is a talent pipeline for BIPOC real estate developers that's hosted through TEDC Creative Capital, which is the state's largest CDFI. And by night, I'm a real estate developer. I am the managing and principal partner of Be Good Development Partners, which is an MBE, WBE firm located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're also one of the top 2 shortlisted candidates to redevelop the Evans Fintu site. And we're really just excited. I'm excited about the opportunity to be a steward of this incredible 22-acre site, which the BMX National Headquarters is located on, with 11 acres being redeveloped by our team, Team Alchemy. I say all that to say is that we are really leading an intentionally curated group of designers, planners, real estate developers, architects, to redevelop this site into what the community sees as both aspirational, ode to them, as well as something that really propels them into the future. We believe that this is an opportunity to honor the past history, as well as create a future focused on the redevelopment of Greenwood, North Tulsa, and the city of Tulsa as a whole. As I mentioned, Evans Fintu sits on 22 acres, with 11 acres being redeveloped within the historic boundaries of Greenwood District. To the east, we are bordered by a neighborhood called Crutchfield. To the north, BMX, the national headquarters. To the west, we are bounded by the railroad tracks in Deep Greenwood. And just to the south, the original site was bisected by 244. So for many, this was a site of environmental contamination. It was a site that, although within the historic boundaries, was really separated from the historic African American community. And it really sat fallow for 2 decades, vacancy, blight. It was a site of a homeless encampment or an unhoused encampment. And really many people said, well, why develop that? And so for us as Team Alchemy, we saw the beauty of this site because truly we believe that constraint is the asset. And so when we look at Evans Fintu, we think it's a unique opportunity to restitch and really pay homage to the original, what we believe urbanist neighborhood is, which was Greenwood, the Freedom Colony established pre-statehood in the city of Tulsa. And so this site is an opportunity to restitch the urban fabric, recreate a dense, walkable, bikeable neighborhood full of economic opportunity and amenities for not just folks who live in North Tulsa and people of color, but really as a destination site and cultural space for the city of Tulsa as a whole. We want to be able to look to the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre as something that we can honor at the site, because the architecture of this building, having been built in 1911, was a witness to the race massacre. But we also see it as an opportunity to come out of the ground, because we know that had future generations been given the opportunity to redevelop post Greenwood's resurgence in 1925 to 1940, the removal of the historic character of the neighborhood through eminent domain and urban removal, we believe that this building actually would have come out of the ground. And so we believe that you can take the spaces below us, but you can never take the opportunity above us. And so we're proposing a commercial mixed-use building that creates a beacon of opportunity at the site, as well as through historic adaptive reuse, reusing the original Oklahoma Ironworks building and transforming it into a space for a new infrastructure, a new economy of Black economic freedom within the city of Tulsa. There are 5 unique things that we propose that I think really set the stage for the discussion around the removal of 244 that come through with this project. We're looking at, again, preserving the historic Oklahoma Ironworks building through adaptive reuse. We're creating a vibrant commercial mixed-use space with a beacon of opportunity. We're looking at curating green space and community lawns for gatherings and outdoor events. We're intentionally looking at, through the Archer Street connection into Deep Greenwood, public art, working with local artisans and makers to do placemaking along, and really creating a cultural high line that moves us back into the heart of community. And what we know is the defining difference is that we're proposing the first community land trust that would be erected in the city of Tulsa, truly giving back community the land that was taken from them. So not only would we propose that the full 11 acres under RFP will go into a land trust, but the historic building as well once the credits are monetized. We propose that this really is an opportunity for the city of Tulsa to not only prepare, but restore and replenish what has been lost. And so we're excited about the opportunity of looking at the land trust as one particular solution for the city. And as we think through the removal of 244, using this as a framework and launchpad for future opportunities to regain land back for community. And at this time, I will turn it over to Councilor McKee.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Michelle. That's a really good place to start, because that's what I feel, that we have so much opportunity, and I've been waiting for the moment when land trust would be on the table for more than a decade before I was in Tulsa, because it's such an important tool. So thank you for that. I am Tulsa City Councilor for District 4. That means all of downtown, which many of you I know saw yesterday, and a big chunk of Midtown. That dividing line of 244 goes right through Greenwood, and right now, south of 244 is my district, and north of 244 is Councilor Vanessa Hall Harper, who sends her regards, and also sends Shada Brown from the Crutcher Foundation to represent her today. When we look at this line, when I moved to Tulsa and I looked at these lines, when I was working at the Oklahoma Policy Institute and looking at these lines and the data with them, it was very clear to me that the physical infrastructure, as you all know, makes an enormous difference, both in what can move physically and also what can move psychologically. When I chose to run for office more than 3 years ago now, one of the key factors for me was making sure that District 4, my district, had the back of District 1, specifically within the context of what was happening in the centennial of the Greenwood Massacre. And that went, it was complicated last year, but it went well enough. But on those 5 days in Greenwood, those of us that were living, eat, sleep, and breathing that space, I was extremely conscious every time I walked under the highway of how loud, of how smelly, of how disruptive that space was. And one of the things I'm most excited about this project is that possibility of connecting what is within the IDL, the interdispersal loop, to what is outside of that, making Greenwood whole again. I think that is something we can do. It takes the kind of vision and the activation that can happen at Evans Finn to do it. And it takes a lot of recognition of why these highways were put in place. A few years ago when I was having breakfast at a downtown cafe with Richard Rothstein, the author of Color Lines, and he was talking to me about redlining in other cities and how it was subtly discussed in chambers of commerce and city councils. One of my colleagues at Oklahoma Policy Institute said, they were subtly discussing in other places in the 1940s and 50s how we want to increase segregation with these highways. In Tulsa, it was not subtle. There, you can look at the records, and it is mentioned that we are intentionally dividing the Black community from what the development that is happening in downtown. But that's not what I see Tulsans wanting today. That's not what I see from the Tulsans that are within District 4 and District 1. I can't speak for down south, but I can talk about my district. And there is so much hope that we can do something different within the culture, within the policies, and within the physical structures. So I'm excited to see what is happening here, and I'm very hopeful, not only from a cultural standpoint and a political standpoint, but also I want to quickly mention from an environmental standpoint. Downtown is a heat sink. Downtown was built to get people in and out real quick. We want to change that. We want downtown to be somewhere that feels like part of the community, and part of that is reconnecting and giving land back. I think we can do that, I really do. And all of you who are working on this give me a lot of hope. Representative Goodwin, you give me a lot of hope fighting at the state capitol. But part of this conversation, and I'll end on this, part of this conversation, as has been mentioned by this team, as is ongoing, the majority of this conversation has to be happening not just in the halls of City Hall or at the state capitol, but within the community. This week, last year, the Tulsa City Council admitted and apologized for the race massacre for the very first time. I'm very proud that we got that done, but what's next? Beyond apology. That's what we voted on this week. The Beyond Apology resolution passed 7-2. If Councilors Lakin or Fowler are your city councilor, ask them why they voted no. But the 6 of us who voted for it voted to enthusiastically support Black people in Tulsa having a process that they have already come up with the funds to pay for themselves, and the plans to have the descendants of the massacre lead the discussions all over the city to find out what reparations means to Tulsa. What does it mean to make amends to the community, to those affected, and to all of us? We're in a very different place than we were when I moved to Tulsa from the Norman, Oklahoma City area 9 years ago. It doesn't always feel like that, but when I stand next to Councilor Hall Harper and we, maybe sometimes by the skin of our teeth, still manage to get things done, I know the ball is moving, things are happening, and I think a lot more is to come. So I'm excited to hear more about this and to learn more from all of you. Thank you. Oh, I forgot to introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my sheroes, Representative Regina Goodwin.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and I didn't do something I was supposed to do, so.
There you go.
All right, you're supposed to have a big picture of me up there. I'm joking, y'all, I'm joking, okay, I'm just glad to be here, and I wanna say this, that, Cody called a while ago, right? Said, hey, I got some plans, and I said, you're a white boy, what's going on? What you up to? You know? And Cody was like, no, this is what I do. I've been committed to this kind of work. I've seen what's happened all across the nation as it relates to race, as it relates to culture, as it relates to urban design, right? And we've always been able to be very open and honest with each other as it relates to, is this even a possibility, right? And I've heard so many folks say that have gotten it done in other cities. Folks said it's never gonna happen, you're wasting your time, go up there, draw your little pretty pictures if you want to, but this ain't happening. And what I can say is, has anything ever happened where everybody was on board, where everybody was moving in the same direction? I can't think of a time. But what I do know is that when we did the interim study, and we had my uncle, who's an attorney, when we had Mr. Piggies, who, when they first built the expressway, when it was first being erected, he was the person on the phone saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't cut directly through Mount Zion Church. Well, you can't even get the back door open. You gotta scoot it over a little bit. We don't want it, but please let us continue to have worship service, right? And to be able to have those voices weigh in on what we're even considering today is invaluable. Because they have, as they say, this historical knowledge and the experience to talk about what do we need to do, what's best for Tulsa. But not just Tulsa, because sometimes we're afraid to say, what's best for black folks? Sometimes it has to be cast in the larger picture of, oh, all of Tulsa's gonna benefit. All of Tulsa's, and let's do it for all of Tulsa. What is wrong with saying black folks have a right to live in a community where they can grow, where they can live, where they can sleep, where they can make money? What is wrong with that? As any, that deserves applause, as any other It's okay, because we've always said if you have a vibrant community, it's open for everybody. Everybody come and enjoy, just the way I go to the south side and enjoy all the amenities on the south side. Nobody told me I couldn't come, right? I just hate that I have to get on the expressway that cuts through my community to go to that place. And so it's a possibility. We know that when we had the interim study, we had brilliant folks that have already done it all the way across America, right? And they were told, you're crazy, that'll never happen. And I still say this, that as long as you have people that have the ingenuity and that have the will to get it done, it can be done. It's just a matter of do you want to get it done. So when you have, we had a bill, House Bill 4153, which spoke specifically to I-244. It talked about connecting with ongoing projects that they have right now. If you can spend that kind of money to talk about finishing something that was started like 50 years ago, quite frankly, and you all not from Tulsa, these have been projects that were planned 50 years ago. And how those could be, this path, right, that cuts through the heart of Greenwood, could be reconnected, right? So all the questions have been answered. Really, there's not one question that has not been addressed, and if Cody doesn't know it or another engineer doesn't know it, we were having conversations on yesterday, as you talk about community land grants, there are answers here. So I would say to everybody in the room, let's know that we're not just doodling today. Let's know that if the director of the Department of Transportation can tell me, well, it's not impossible, in other words, I don't want to do it, right? Anybody says, well, it's not impossible, that means I really don't want to do this and wish you guys would go somewhere, because the bill that I had, supported on a local level, supported by many other folks. We had a community meeting, we had the interim study, great. When you have the Department of Transportation that is not necessarily supporting, and the Department of Transportation owns that land, the land that we want to repurpose, this space that we want to open up, so we can really reconnect community, those are issues that we got to work through, right? No question about it. So is this easy? No. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. Is it possible? Yes. And it's simply a matter matter of will and what do you want to do, right? And when that's where we are. And let me say this. As I saw the beautification of the bridges and they're giving, first of all, I'm an artist. I'm all about our artists getting as much money as they can for whatever they want. I have difficulty though when the Department of Transportation is going to spend $2.5 million to beautify the expressways, and they say to me, this is about reconnecting communities. That's not reconnecting communities, that's putting lipstick on a pig. And for all of you, I don't care who you are, if you're getting in on that $280,000 a person, I'm not mad at you. I get it, that's a chance of a lifetime, but I'm saying larger than that money. There is a principle and there are people that deserve better. And when they said, hey, Regina, well, because I'm an artist, will you come judge it for us? No, I won't. Because what we were proposing was something that was sustainable. It wasn't surface, it wasn't symbolic, right? And if I know you have not given $2.5 million to the black contractors in Oklahoma, quite frankly, to work on these expressways, I'm certainly not buying into you're going to give $280,000 to artists to paint those very expressways that are central to our conversation. So that's all I got to say. I want to see some great ideas, great love in the room to see how do we move Tulsa forward, and when we do that, we move people forward. When we move people forward, we move communities forward. And I thank all of you for everything that you're doing, every T that you've crossed, every I that you've dotted, right? And I'm just saying together, looking at what is sustainable and what is significant should matter. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. And to the point that you just said, the $2.5 million. To think about the fact that with the reconnecting communities, there is a ton of planning grants out there, and that $2.5 million would have paid for every study we needed to be able to get to the process to remove 244. And instead of doing that, they're going to paint the expressways. So let's just throw that out there, that it's not the best use of resources for the state. So like some of these maps that are kind of up on the wall over here, this particular slide just kind of shows you some past and present. So these blue dots basically symbolize the same spots on both pictures. And so one is in about 1960 and the other one is from about 2020. So you can see how many homes and businesses were in this area, and the dotted line is where 244 ended up being built. So 244 in this section, was built over, a couple hundred homes, several hundred businesses, and then the wider urban renewal, took out another significant portion of Greenwood for blocks north, which is the plan that Katie was talking about in terms of the master plan of how do we repurpose back that land. So this kind of just gives you a little bit of context as well in terms of what is going on with some of the land that is surrounding the highways. And that's really how this discussion became so central too, is if we're planning to do so many things around the highways, and even on the south side of the highway, it is one of the most rapidly developing urban neighborhoods in the state, and probably in the south central United States. So this land is very valuable. There's obviously demand for new development in this area as well. We have over probably about $200 million in development in just a couple of blocks south of 244. And so we're running out of land as well to even build on. So in order, most of this land, if we were able to repurpose it, would be immediately put back into use. So, I just kind of wanted to pull up one of these old aerials as well and just kind of show you guys. And I highlighted two specific areas because, like Representative Goodwin had said, these freeways were planned for a long time. The state and the city started talking about these in the 1950s. And they started acquiring properties through eminent domain. And it wasn't a coincidence that the first things they removed were the commercial core of Greenwood. And they did this to basically destroy all of the businesses in this area, because if you think about it, if you live in these areas, the place you get your hair cut is no longer there. Your doctor's office is no longer there. Your grocery store is no longer there. Your movie theater's not there. Everything that people used to support their life was erased first. So to me, that's not a coincidence that in two of these areas right here, which was the vast majority of the historic Greenwood core, was removed, and it was removed first. So after this, as the community somewhat, people knew that the highways were coming, and so when desegregation happened, the people that could leave left because they were worried about their financial stability of like what happens with my home if there's a freeway that's built through it. And the city was in the process of acquiring so much more additional land around it. So really, the way that they were even able to acquire the land was not in an ethical manner, because they did it on purpose to devalue land around it by removing commercial businesses, so that way they could then acquire people's homes for much cheaper. So, when you talk about that in terms of, one of the questions that we're going to talk about later is like, how do we fix that? People had their homes essentially stolen, and they were acquired through eminent domain for much less than what they were really worth and what they should have been worth. So it's how do we fix that and repair some of that as well. So, and this is the same aerial, it's a pretty stark contrast. I'll go back and forth just one time. It's astonishing how much of the homes and businesses have been removed just from the highways. So, and if you think about that too, is that this is a financial disaster for all of our cities in the United States. Because every home that was there, every business that was there paid property taxes, it paid sales taxes, which funds our schools, funds all the essential services that we need. And we wiped out hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for a freeway that allowed people to get in and out of our communities faster. And one particular point about 244 is that it's not really even used as a local commuting corridor. It's the vast majority of traffic is regional. So only 5% of the traffic that uses 244 exits at downtown. 95% of the traffic is people going from another community to another community, and they're just doing it as fast as possible through the city of Tulsa. And that was always the guise of like, oh, people will get off the highway and stop and shop downtown. That's not true. They stop at the suburb and they go to the big gas station and McDonald's. They don't stop in downtown because they think it's confusing and scary. So that notion of economic development was a lie. So, when we're talking about that in terms of our financial, how do we support our city from a fiscal standpoint that we make solid cities? This is the way to do it. Get rid of the highways, repurpose the land, and redevelop the land, and put all of this land back into use. So I'll go through some of these pretty quick, but this kind of gives you some ideas of Google Street Views from 2007 and 2022. So these are both looking at the same space. So this does show you that there's a lot of development that's going on, even in the Greenwood community. But part of the problem with some of the new development in the Greenwood community is it's a bunch of white developers that have ignored the history of Greenwood. There's no thought of we're building on land that was taken from people unfairly. So a lot of the development that's happened has just it's not been good development, and it's not been even built in a good scale either. A lot of this is the typical, almost the suburban, urban type multifamily units where it's a bunch of multifamily units wrapped around a parking garage. So some of this is, not necessarily the best development. So this gives you an idea of Greenwood Main Street has had some changes made to it. Specifically, it was given a road diet, which helped tremendously of giving some on-street parking to a lot of the black businesses that are left here. But you can see, that freeway is such a prominent point on Greenwood, and the only way to get north and south is to walk underneath it. So same thing here. And on the left, this was another mistake that the city of Tulsa made about a decade ago at this point, was they built the ballpark, even though it did provide a lot of foot traffic for the neighborhoods. You know, again, it was something that was done that wasn't necessarily in the best intentions for North Tulsa or for Greenwood. And I think a lot of the citizens in Greenwood didn't want the stadium in the first place, and they were ignored. You know, it's a very typical thing that the city has done in the past. You know, and it was what Katie said, is that, you know, in terms of that particular project they're working on, is that that's some of the things that the city is trying to heal at this point, is trying to figure out how to actually listen to people. And you know, this is a story that's repeated everywhere. Specifically yesterday, people went into the Louisiana session, that it was the four, what was the name of the, there's
Claiborne Expressway?
What was the?
Four Corners Coalition,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, and so, you know, that's what they're talking about, is like, it's particularly there, that's probably one of the biggest, you know, things going on right now in terms of trying to build freeways through Black communities still. And we have a broken process in the environmental review process of everybody has to go out and get community feedback, but then they just ignore it. So, you know, what's the point of it if you just ignore it? You say, we know better than you, and that this is good for you, it's good for economic development, and it's a lie. So, right now, you know, something else that is kind of, along with some of the other things we had discussed of how 244 in this conversation came to forefront, is the fact that we are building an outer loop through Tulsa. And so, like I had mentioned, the fact that the vast majority of the traffic for 244 is regional. So once this loop is finished around Tulsa, then this gives a bypass through both the north and the south sides. And this loop would actually not be very much longer than it actually takes you to go straight through downtown. So it adds about a mile if you go north, about a little bit over a mile if you go to the south. And if you think about that, going 65, 70 miles an hour, that adds maybe 2 or 3 minutes to your commute. So when this loop is finished, 244 is obsolete. There's no reason for it to be there. We would have 4 redundant corridors within the metropolitan area at that point. And so if we want to talk about fiscal responsibility too, you know, that's always a thing you hear in southern states from people that want to dismiss opinions that are different than theirs. You know, they like to throw that out there, but it's not fiscally responsible to have 4 interstate corridors that we're all trying to maintain that we don't need all of them. And particularly when one of them goes through some of the most valuable land in the state of Oklahoma. So we've looked at case studies. Most of the people in this room probably know these. You know, we looked at caps and tunnels. It's very expensive. It's not necessarily feasible for Tulsa, in particular for 244, given it's elevated. So we can't cap it. You know, if we wanted to bury 244, it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars, and at that point, we should just get rid of it. So we've looked at other case studies, Rochester, New York, particularly because it's about the same size metropolitan area, it has similar economic demand drivers, and it's much more realistic when you're looking at the cost numbers to do this. And Rochester has done a fantastic job in terms of what these highway repurposing can look like. Milwaukee was the other example. So we looked at a very broad area, and something else that I'll kind of dive deep a little bit into is just kind of the financial side of it. So we looked at a much bigger corridor originally when we thought reconnecting communities was going to have $10 billion. Yeah, that did not happen. So we are looking at a much smaller area to begin with. And you know, the idea is that once we do one section, then it allows us to do other sections, and we can take this out in phases. In particular, the 2 north-south corridors that are not 244, the traffic counts that are on those are about 30,000 cars per day. We have about a dozen city arterial streets that have higher traffic counts than that. So when you're thinking about the maintenance difference and just the cost to maintain both of those corridors, those highways aren't needed in the first place. So but we're looking at specifically the 244 corridor that's highlighted here as the first realm. So this was just kind of a general idea of like if you just laid a street grid out, similar to what the street grid that was kind of there beforehand. The orange shows you an idea of how much land you get back. You know, it's in this particular area, it's close to 100 acres. If you go out, you're talking about several hundred acres of land that you can redevelop. And you know, at that point, you're talking about 10,000 plus residential units. You know, millions of square feet of commercial space. You know, it's a lot. But, you know, I mean, there's lots of ideas of how to do this. Representative Goodwin had even kind of threw me for a loop at one point, and she was like, why do we even need the street rebuilt? Like, you don't need it there. You can just reconnect the north-south grid, and you're going to open up even more land in that way. So there are so many different ways to think about this. This is just one kind of really rough sketch that we kind of came up with. So the original plan that we had looked at, which was a much larger one, was somewhere around 150 acres. And that's $200 million in land value alone. I didn't really go back into my background, but I'm a commercial real estate appraiser, so you know, that's how I came up with a lot of these cost estimates and land valuations. So, you know, cost somewhere around $250 million. Like I had said, you know, you're talking about 10 million square feet of new development, and this gives you the ability to provide equity back into these developments through the community. You know, when you're talking about the project costs and new revenues, when you're talking about that, we looked at a scenario of like, what if the city paid for this by themselves in a 30-year bond, typical interest rate, what would the payments be? And then we applied a moderate development scenario to that of what are we even seeing built downtown now. So we took, you know, how many units are typically coming online in this area, how much do we feel like there's demand for? And we basically put this into a discounted cash flow based on the revenues that would come in. So what does that tell you? You're talking about 25 million-ish in ad valorem taxes that would be added after full build out. Over $15 million in new sales taxes between the state, city, and county. So even if you didn't, if you place the land into a trust without selling it off, not paying for it, it just is fully returned back to the community. Over 30 years, it's a 10% return on investment on that $250 million cost. If the land was sold, obviously that goes up, but that's not really the intention of this, isn't to profit off the land, it's to give the land back. So, you know, you're talking about that gives equity back to the community of somewhere around $200 million. That then, as these new real estate developments come online, they're financially benefiting from it. So, you know, just the land value alone, if it's put into a land trust and you went to a bank and, you know, use a typical loan to value, you're talking about it can leverage in excess of $700 million in new development on day one. So that's kind of where we kind of came in and started looking at things of like, how do we make sure that this benefits the community? You know, this is obviously where we need ideas and input. You know, we want ODOT to give the land back to the community, put it into a land trust or something similar to that. You know, ways that we can build affordable and, you know, mixed income housing and a way to make this community whole again. So I'll go through some of these pretty quick, but this just kind of gives you some context to what the area of just kind of some bird eye views. The orange is the 244 corridor, and this vacant land kind of on the south would be looking north, and that's the old University Center land. So this looks at one of the particular interchanges, which the interchanges are going to be the most difficult thing to deal with, of like how, if we get rid of the highway between these two sections, how do we tie this back into the street grid, and how do we do this in a proper way? You know, because it's crossing a railroad, and there's an interstate below it, above it. You know, these are some of the most ridiculous interchanges you've ever driven through. And one of the points that was made by somebody out of Boston that was talking about the economics between car crashes and what congestion typically costs. And car crashes cost almost 10 times as much more than what congestion costs. So these particular sections of highway are the most traffic, they are the most prone to hazardous spills. That there's at one point, even last month, that the highway was closed down for almost 5 to 10% of the total hours of a day because of car accidents and semis overturning on these exits. And this is a tremendous drain on city resources as well, because every time they have the EMS and fire have to go out there, close down the highway for several hours, clean it up. So there's a lot of even other financial aspects that people don't really even realize to highways, that is just a drain on resources locally. So this is the other interchange on the east side. This one is probably not as complicated to deal with because there's no railroad and other things to deal with, but yeah, now I'll turn it over to Ryan, and he can kind of talk about some of the models and stuff that he's kind of started working on, and just kind of talking about some of the current conditions as well.
Thank you, Cody. So before we break into the workshop session, you'll notice that on the tables we've got various satellite imagery from current and past, a few different time periods on here that feel free to draw on top of those and add post-it notes and do whatever you want on top of it. And then we've also got some of these 3D models here that we've been developing on the side too. These are 3D models of early 1900s Greenwood Business District in Tulsa. They're still sort of rough initial first drafts, but the idea here is to figure out, or to start to get a sense of, what the area was like in the early 1900s during that time period. What was the building scale like, or the building types, all the other urbanist sort of traits about this time period, and how can we take that and utilize that as inspiration when we're thinking about new designs and new buildings and new developments in the area as well. So feel free to look at these and draw on top of these and do whatever you want. There should be some of these images in here as well. And then we have a series of questions. Did I go the right way? Nope. There we go. We have some questions as well that are on the table too that we'd like to pose to participants, and some of them are quite broad, like how can we improve the area in general, but some of them start to get more specific as well, such as what kind of urban design mechanisms should we put in place for the new land, what kind of form-based code could we utilize if that's the best idea, how can we make the area more beautiful, things like that as well. So feel free to write answers and things and explain them to people, and there'll be people walking around taking questions and feedback and stuff as well. So yeah, thanks. Let's get started.